Hello, and welcome to RRI Explained, a ResBios podcast. It is the aim of the ResBios project to embed responsible research and innovation, or RRI, into 4 universities across Europe, in the hope of improving the interconnectivity between science research and society, with a particular focus on the biosciences. But what is RRI exactly? Well, hopefully we can find out together. Today we are joined by Professor Elsa González-Esteban, Project Coordinator of the ETHNA System project. The goal of this project is to help provide a framework for higher education, funding and research centres to create ethical governance systems that work for them. Thank you for joining us today, Elsa.
Thank you, Chris, for inviting me.
You're joining us from ETHNA Systems today. Could you describe what the ETHNA System project is and what the ETHNA System hopes to achieve?
Yes, the ETHNA System project started in January 2020, funding from for the European Commission program Horizon 2020 also. And the main objective that we have is describe an ethical governance system for different contexts where the research and innovation take place. It's focused more in the governance dimension or key of the research and innovation topic of RRI from an ethical point of view. This is why our title, ETHNA, means ethical, ETHNA, the governance in higher education, funding and research centers. These are the contexts that we want to test and pilot in our system.
So it provides sort of a framework for higher education institutes to sort of develop their own ethics governance using kind of lessons learned from RRI in general. Would you say that was correct?
That's correct, but it's not only using the background from RRI knowledge that is using, of course, both sides. I mean, from one side, from the academic improvement that the academia has developed in this dimension of inclusion, responsiveness, reflexivity, and anticipation, but also in the RRI knowledge that has been developed by the European Commission and the policymakers with the different keys of RRI. That means ethics, governance, gender, equality, public engagement, and open access. Then we use both, but from an ethical perspective. And we are using the perspective of the discourse ethics. That means that we are trying to use this top-down from the ethics, but also the bottom-up of the ethics, and try to move our research and innovation in the higher education and other kind of context from the buildings and working with the society at the same time.
ETHNA obviously focuses on the ethical side and then builds upon that using the other RRI keys. Was there a reason why you chose ethics as the main building blocks for the rest of the ETHNA governance system? Is that the core of a lot of RRI ideas, do you think, or is that just sort of where the project sort of expertise lies?
Well, the short answer is both. I mean, many of the researchers that we have in the consortium, in the partners, many of them, they have expertise in ethics, but in applied ethics, working in organizations. Not only in the ethics understood as integrity, but also as ethical structures that try to hear the stakes of the society and try to introduce inside of the organization. Then the other reason why is ethical governance is because one of the barriers to develop a research and innovation responsible in the sense of taking into account the legitimacy of the interests that the society has is that many times this responsibility, we think that should stay in the researcher hands. And the idea of this project is to help the researchers, because the institution should to take this in their core. I mean, we can't ask to the researcher individually if the organization is not helping them with guidelines, with structures, with a structure inside where the researcher can ask directly and say, I have this doubt. I have this question. There are guidelines that we can use it, guidelines that I can think about that and then introduce the reflexivity in my research group, but that the main work or the work should be developed more from the organization, and not we expect that the researchers should do that without any kind of frameworks, and to provide them frameworks clearly.
So it seems that the ETHNA system provides, as you say, this scaffolding or framework for these institutes to sort of build their own governance system that best fits them. A bit of a kind of pick and mix of just sort of like bits from here and bits from there. Could you describe how the ETHNA governance system works and how these institutes kind of build their own governance system?
I explain using a metaphor. The metaphor is the house, how you build a house. Then we have found in our multi-consultation that we have finished right now in this month, in December 2021, we have finished a multi-consultation with 25 interviews, 90 survey online in Europe, and also 5 workshops with the different keys of the RRI system we are tackled in our project, that are gender, open access, public engagement, and the integrity, research integrity, because governance is the same, all the system. And the metaphor is that you need to develop a structure like a house where you have a basement. Maybe the basement should be what we name RRI office or RRI officer. This would be the basement of the house. What is that? This is one person, or maybe some part of the structure, your university or your research center. If this is big, but if it's very small, it's just a position that try to generate an awareness about the guidelines that are recognized in Europe, and not only in Europe, but also in the world of research and innovation, to provide this information about the main guidelines in gender, open access, public engagement, and about integrity, to know and these guidelines and which kind of implication can have these guidelines in your institution, taking into account your reality. Then this work is made, and then you provide this information and awareness about that. But also the RRI office try to develop and write an action plan, and then for 3 years about which kind of these aspects working with the stakeholders inside of your institution should be developed in 3 years, more in depth, and which kind of help you need as researcher or group or so on. This is the basement, no? It's a block. We are using the Legos, the construction. The other 3 blocks are like the pillars, and then you can construct a pillar that could be a code of ethics and good practice for your institution, not just to use, for example, the ALEA, that is very interesting in research integrity as a good guideline, but maybe to my institution is not needed all that things of ALEA, but I need something from ALEA and another things about, for example, good practice on editing, or if I have some program that I fund in research, then I need to adapt in my code. Then we provide in this ETHNA system, we have a lot of material that we provide to think about inside of your center, which kind of code you can create and could be useful for your institution and your researchers. Second pillar is the ethical committee. Of course, there are in universities is an instrument that is more standard, not in all Europe, but in some countries is quite used. But the issue is that if you have or you don't have, you try to use your structure or create a structure as a deliberative way. That means where I go, if I am a researcher and I have some questions about my research in artificial intelligence, about the privacy or how to use this privacy if I'm using this device for elderly people, for example, where is the space where in my university where I can think and anticipate and try to describe my project in the best way with legitimacy and ethical legitimacy in this sense. This is why ETHNA System. Then the ETHNA System should to provide this kind of structure inside. And the third block is the ETHNA line, the ethics line, that is like a channel. This is less complex, I think. It's just to have a channel where stakeholders inside or outside can ask about the kind of research that we have developed, or that can, it's like a whistleblower line, but not only for queries, but also to advise or to think or to ask with the institution about the research and innovation in a responsible way. And finally, and not least, as always we said, is the monitoring. Each of these blocks, the basement, and the pillars, each of them has the monitor system of progress of implementation of the action plan, and also to explain in a responsiveness way to the society how we are doing our research.
So that's really interesting. I just wanted to go back to, I do have a question about the ETHNA system in general, but the monitoring kind of thing, is that done externally or is that in an internal kind of monitoring system? Like, is there someone from ETHNA who will come in and see if these institutes are abiding by their own code of conduct and using the committee and the hotline correctly? Or is this sort of like an internal sort of checks and balance?
Both, because we think that this kind of monitoring system is designed in the way to, inside of the institution, to know and generate a reflection about how these actions that we are decide to push in our institution are achieving the purpose that we want to achieve, but also outside, like a dashboard to show the ETHNA system has tried to cover all the keys except the literacy science, but then to show the outside how we are performing, like a reporting and generate trustworthy in the society.
That's interesting. You talked before about how the ETHNA system has quite a lot of flexibility in how an institute would implement these 3 pillars of the ETHNA system. And I understand that that would be very important to be not so rigid, because obviously the needs of a research institute are different to the needs of a funding body and vice versa. There are also some issues with, I don't know, having kind of like a standard sort of ethical practice across the board, really. And I know that different institutes in different countries and different kind of areas of study might have different sort of needs and requirements for a governance body. I'm just wondering if you could talk about the kind of challenges and the opportunities that this allows for.
I appreciate so much this question, because we are in fact reflecting on that in the project, because we are in the phase of the living labs and the piloting in the 6 organizations where we are piloting. And one of the questions that we have facing in the planning of the living labs is precisely that we are generating a lot of reflexivity inside of our institutions, because we should think about which kind of guidelines, which kind of resources we have, and which kind of challenges our research but the research that I'm doing right now has, and then be more in depth on them about the needs that our researchers has to, then we can't, ETHNA system guide that is in the website, the first draft of the ETHNA system is in the website. We're adapting right now to our institutions. That means that at the end, each institution will develop its own ethical code and good practice. Then, if we use the metaphor of the music, the melody and the harmony will be the same for all the 6 results. But not the song. I mean, the sing will be different how they sing. Why? Because there are someone that, for example, NTNU has more scientific research that for example, that University Jaume I. That means that the kind of code of ethics go more in depth, because we are trying to find, for example, more guidelines for the humanities or social science. And then other projects from the European Commission have worked about that, and we are using this knowledge to develop our code of practice. Then the harmony of the music is the same, but the thing will be different, of course.
So that's really interesting. So kind of like the base kind of level of the ETHNA system just acts as kind of a leveler for all these institutions that everyone's kind of building upon. So everyone's got a base sort of ethics understanding and framework that they're then building upon, using the other pillars to fit their needs.
Mm-hmm. That's correct. In fact, when we have analyzed right now the drivers and the aspects that can move in quicker our ETHNA system in different contexts, we have found that we should to consider to like two axes. One is the structure that you have in your the structures that you have developed during the past, and that they are working perfectly and they are very mature. Which kind of structures you haven't, or that you can reuse to develop and to use as driver. And another is the commitment of the top management. That is very important. But this is a lesson that we have learned from the applied organizations, ethics, and so on. The top commitment is very important. I mean, if there are not awareness and we have the not only the hits and the resources, but also the willings to help the researchers and to try to develop a better research and innovation in the ethical way, it's very difficult. That means that we need incentives inside, if not only outside. We need the incentive from the funding, but we need the incentive inside of our own institutions. And we need that institutions, the organization, provide the many answers before to the researchers. This is many of the researchers in the interviews, and when we explain all of this, they say, okay, that's great, but I should to reflect. It's time when I define a project and how I do. Please provide me with instruments. And we have tried to do it with examples and with also with guidelines very clear for them.
So the ETHNA system is sort of like, it's a living document. It's not static. It sort of adapts with the needs and the changes that a research institute sort of goes through, it seems.
Exactly, yeah.
Is that kind of the living, what you mentioned previously, the living labs methodology? Could you describe what that is in a little bit more detail, please?
Mm-hmm. Well, in fact, we are using, it's not very common. I think that we have a pilot in that also, because in using the living lab with a concept that is as abstract in some ways as about the ethics, it's not like to create furniture with instruction. It's different. Then we have readapt the living lab to create a planning, a consulting internal and external, and then readapt the concept inside of the living lab with the internal and external stakeholders using the different quadrihelix also roles. And then its piloting is like rewriting the content of the ETHNA system that fits with its institution. And we are in the middle of this living lab, then I can tell more. But at the beginning was like a little bit more difficult, because it's not like we go to use the concept as it has been right at the beginning, but we need to rewrite first this concept in the living lab in the planning stage, and we are in this part.
How has the project been going? Like, you're now about a year into it, and how has the results been so far? Has there been have the results been promising? And what are the long-term hopes of the project, kind of from now moving on to the end of the project and then beyond, like the legacy of ETHNA Systems?
Well, we are in the middle of the project, and maybe it's a little bit early, but in general terms, at this point, I can say that at least we can provide organized thinking about which kind of diversity of governance structure in Europe has been used, which of them are working very good in some contexts and which other are not as good in other contexts. This from one way, because many of the projects use the same structures, thinking that they can work in all the contexts properly, and that's not true. This is one of the lessons that we have learned, and then maybe we can have this legacy to others. Other is that we need, and we are very, sorry for the metaphor, but we are very hungry of very clear guidelines. I mean, this is what the organization and researchers are asking more about argumentaries. I mean, people say, well, I want this ETHNA system in my organization, but please give me and help me to explain why, because I need to convince. Then one of the legacy is a very good, rational and wise, very clear to research performing and research funding organization to about why, and not why only in abstract, but in very concrete day-to-day practice things. And another legacy is that in the piloting, and we are institutionalizing in 6 organizations in 4 contexts. And I can say right now that the compromise of these 6 pilotings are to create their own house. And 2 of them are working to develop all the house. And the others are working what we mentioned, in at least the first level. That means the basement, this office with an action plan. And the action plan is for 3 years. That means that, I think that it can be a good legacy also, and to share the experience, of course.
So hopefully other institutions will perhaps take up the ETHNA system even after learning lessons from the 6 institutes that are currently taking it up in this pilot study. You're hoping that maybe other institutes might see the benefits of such a governance system, and perhaps will learn from the mentors of these pilot institutes. Is that sort of where the ETHNA system would like to go, kind of beyond the project after the lifespan of the ETHNA system as a whole?
Yeah, I think so. Well, at least we have tried it.
So what are the next steps? As you say, you're halfway through. Yeah, what are the next stages in the project for ETHNA?
Well, we are, as I mentioned before, we are working in the living labs until the next spring, and then start the write of the learnings in a manual to show step by step how, from our knowledge and from our experience in the pilotings, our institution can take the handbook and try to develop in a very easier way. We are working always with this flexibility and the easier way to ready to use for organization. This is our purpose. And the other next step is evaluate internally also. One of the things that we have discovered is that we have learned more than we expected at the beginning, in the process, in all this process.
Is there anything, I don't know, any institutions that wanted to take up an ethics governance kind of like ETHNA? Is there anything that you would advise to them? If you give them 3 hints, is there anything that you can think of, or I don't know, how to start thinking about this sort of thing?
Okay. Well, The first advice that I can say or can share with them is, first, look at inside of your institution. Look the drivers in your personnel. That means in the commitments and the willingness that you can find, and also in the structures that you can use it or reduce it. Because many times we don't need to create another wheel. We don't need to create another structure. This is not, ETHNA System is not about the history of creating another structure. It's to reduce the structures that you have and focus some of them or open some of them to be more broader or more open to this. Then that this is not another thing. And the other advice is that you need to create a reflexivity atmosphere in your institution. And then you should be prepared to hear criticisms. And this is very important. I mean, because in other, if you think that people will to embrace this without any kind of reticences, then maybe ETHNA System will not work, because this is not just to put a stick in a paper. This is to think about how we do our research and rethink many times the behaviors or the policies that we have in our institution. Then we need to win the willingness of the people, but also to think about the efficiency of our structures.
I think that's all my questions. So I'm just wondering do you think there's anything we've missed or you'd like to add, or do you want to talk about any kind of up and coming kind of news or events that are happening, or I don't know, or do you think we've covered most of what we wanted to talk about?
Well, at the stage that we have we are in the project, I think that's only say to you and to your project, thank you for this opportunity to share this project. And I hope that many others can be interesting to think and to give us more input to develop our system and to generate sisters works with other projects. Thank you so much, Chris.
No, thank you for joining us. And yeah, hopefully this could be the start of something, I don't know, a dialogue, a conversation that carries on past this podcast. So again, thank you for joining us, Elsa.
Thank you so much.
The ResBios project is funded by the EU with the grant number 872146. To learn more about the ResBios project and the other pillars of RRI, please go to resbios.eu. Thank you for joining us. See you next time.